Totally sustainable. And
Okay.
let's turn to that. Really good question, Brian. So, by the way, I had a conversation with Peter Navarro. He's the trade and manufacturing czar in the White House.
Yeah, we've had him on
Uh,
the show. Yeah.
Peter's a great guy. So not long ago, and I he's like a conversation with him is like an oral exam and a PhD oral exam. It's like it's really tough, and he asks really hard questions, which is fine. But he's got the professorial aspect of it, but a really good guy. But I kind of hit him with something he hadn't thought of, and he said, "Yeah, you're right." I said, "You want to end this war? Stop the sanctions, flood the market with oil, get the price down to $30, and Putin will stop the war."
Mm.
That's how. Peter said, "Yeah, you're right." Because what are we doing? We're putting on more sanctions. We're raising the price of oil. We're putting more money in Putin's pocket. And so to answer your question, Brian, he can finesse the war indefinitely at these high oil prices. 60, yeah, okay, 65. It's been up to 90 not that long ago, but 65, 70 or higher, and I think it will go higher for the reasons we're discussing, finesses the war, and Putin can continue it indefinitely. If you want to, this is where the geopolitical eggheads don't understand markets, right? If Putin's depending on oil, high-priced oil revenue to finance the war, the way to stop the war is to get the price of oil down to 30, 40 bucks. Well, how do you do that? Not with sanctions. Take the sanctions, let Russia pump as much, let Saudi Arabia pump as much, the U.S. open up the federal lands, open up the Gulf of America, offshore drilling, Alaska, flood the market with oil, get the price down to 30, 40 bucks, and then Russia will cave, but not before. So so now let's just take that thread a step further. So I talked about, okay, what's Trump going to do on August 8th? What's he going to do when this ultimatum runs out? Well, he could do nothing, in which case he's completely lost credibility. He's embarrassed himself, and he's weakened the United States. They won't do that, but that's kind of one choice. What is he going to do? Well, one thing he could do is increase arms shipments, okay, to Ukraine, because U.S. has been dialing those down. All right, let's talk about that. This has been another one of these narratives, these mainstream media narratives that's false, by the way, since the beginning of the war. The wonder weapons. Okay, so what do? We sent HIMARS precision-guided artillery to Ukraine. It took about a month or less for the Russians to hack the GPS system, so they go off course. They fall into cornfields, right? I mean, you can't, if the precision-guided artillery is guided by GPS, and you can hack the GPS, those missiles are harmless because they don't go anywhere. Okay, so forget the HIMARS. Patriot anti-missile batteries, by the way, they cost $1 billion a piece. $1 billion, and there aren't that many of them in the world, but we gave them 7 or 8. The Russians systematically destroyed every one of them, $7 billion down the drain. How did they do that? What about the Patriot? What about the Golden Dome and the Iron Dome and the Patriot anti-missile system? They can't hit hypersonic missiles. They can hit cruise missiles. Cruise missiles go about 500, 600 miles an hour. These hypersonic missiles, some of them go 10,000 miles per hour, and the Patriots can't hit them. So what good are your Patriot missile and a Patriot anti-missile defense batteries doing if hypersonic missiles can blow them up, which they are? So send them a few more, waste a couple more $1 billion. By the way, we're stripping our own arsenals of those weapons. And the U.S., we're supposed to have them here in the U.S. to protect, critical infrastructure. We want to give, to the extent we have any, we want to give them to Israel to protect against Iran. And so the latest version was Trump told Germany and the Netherlands, and I think, mainly Germany and the Netherlands, you got to send yours to Ukraine. And they're like, hey, we only got 3 left. Now you're sending 1 to Ukraine. Yes, fine, send them 2 or 3 more. The Russians will blow them up, a couple more billion down the drain. They don't work. Okay, the British Challenger tank, the German Leopard 2 tank, the U.S. Abrams tank, all this armor. Zelensky said, tanks. We sent it to them. By the way, the UK has pretty much stripped their arsenals of what the few Challengers they had left. Same thing with Germany and the Leopard, same thing with the US and the Abrams. They were all left burning on the battlefield. They're too heavy for Ukrainian soil. They're not well suited, and they were invented before the creation of the drone. So using drones and precision-guided missiles, etc., Bradley fighting vehicles burning on the battlefield, tanks burning on the battlefield. They did nothing. What about the F-16s? Remember, Biden spent 2 years, are we going to send them F-16s or not? Well, we finally did. Why don't you hear about them? because they're getting shot down by the Russians. I mean, but with the A300s or the A400s, the S400s, that's the Russian surface-to-air anti-missile system. So we've sent them all the wonder weapons, and they don't work. In fact, the implications of that are even scarier, which is, oh, NATO sent them all their weapons. They've been blown up and destroyed in the battlefield in Ukraine. They don't work. They haven't stopped the Russians. What's stopping the Russians from going to the English Channel? Nothing. I mean, they're not going to. That's not my forecast. I'm just saying that NATO is actually far from turning the tide in Ukraine. They've proved how impotent they are against the latest Russian weaponry and technology, hypersonic missiles, digital warfare, drones, etc. And who's joined in? Iran and North Korea. We're making them stronger. So every single thing about this has been disastrous for the West, U.S., but obviously NATO and UK and France also. So just to round out this part of the discussion, why will sending more weapons to Ukraine make a difference? The answer is it won't.
Okay.
So it's the same failure. So what's left? Well, economic sanctions. Okay, 100 sanctions haven't worked. Why not try 101? But here's where and I said earlier that it's all connected, like on a global basis. So now what Trump wants to do are called secondary sanctions. So we've sanctioned, but you can't sanction Russia anymore. We've sanctioned everything. They can't export. They can't get high technology. Their oil's illegal, et cetera, et cetera. A secondary sanction is when you find another country that's doing business with Russia, and you say, "Hey, if you do business with Russia, we're going to sanction you." Well, who's the you? China and India, because China and India are buying Russian oil, paying dollars, and that is financing the war effort, propping up the Russian economy, no question about it. So, but we haven't been able to stop Russia's exports. So we're saying to China and India, you stop buying Russian oil, we're going to sanction you. Okay, what's going on right now? The U.S. is in bilateral trade talks with India, and we're in bilateral trade talks with China. Okay, if you're India and China, you're sitting there saying, how can I do a deal with the U.S.? You may be a couple of days away from throwing 200% tariffs on me because I'm buying Russian oil. Why are we quibbling over 50% or 20% tariffs? Why should I do anything with you when I don't know what's coming on Friday? Well, the answer is they won't. So the failure of the Indian and Chinese trade talks so far is not because they don't want to talk or they don't know how to make a deal. Of course they do. It's because they're in the crosshairs of secondary sanctions because they get oil from Russia. And how on earth could you agree to any deal if you don't know that Trump's going to smack you with 200% tariffs the next day? It would be ridiculous to make a deal. So this, again, sorry to go on, Brian, but I'm trying to show how from Ukraine to Russian oil exports, imports by China and India, which those countries need to run their economies, to primary sanctions that have failed, military aid that has failed, now to secondary sanctions, which will also fail, but they'll fail in a more spectacular way because they're going to blow up normal bilateral trade talks. I mean, this whole thing is a mess. They have not. By the way, I tell this to people in the Trump administration. I get a hearing, but it doesn't seem to change the analysis.
That's an incredible breakdown, and now it makes more sense that these talks are sluggish for both China and India. Just a quick question: when you were talking about the military, this highly advanced drone digital army or force, you mentioned, first of all, that nothing's going to stop the Russians from going across the channel, but the intellectual property they're developing, I mean, I've read some of the articles in the journal, which I'm sure don't even do it justice. I mean, that is some scary, dangerous technology. And I'm guessing if you put 1,000 of the high-tech Russian soldiers on American soil, they could probably take out every major leader in the country within 24 hours without the U.S. even knowing what's going on. Now, maybe I'm exaggerating that, but both of these sides, Ukraine and Russia, seem to have extremely advanced digital warfare that I would guess we better all start getting concerned about.
Well, Ukraine has extremely advanced digital warfare, which is completely non-indigenous. It's run by the UK and the US. I mean, it just is, with bases in Germany. The other day, Russian special forces landed in a not really a covert operation, but a commando operation is a better way to put it, west of Odessa. Now, the Russians don't control that part of the coastline. That's still Ukraine. But they sent their special operations team west of Odessa, closer to Romania, to take out a Ukrainian command center and they captured 2 British officers who have been identified, and an MI6 asset who has not been identified. But two soldiers in uniform and 1 MI6 spy are now Russian prisoners. Wow. So, okay, here we are, World War III. I mean, the U.S. and the U.K. Have been, the French have been denying that we have access there. Of course we do. Of course, the CIA has, stations all over the place, operation centers all over the place. So does MI6. So does the UK military. But all the satellite surveillance, the computer capability, the targeting capability, et cetera, all comes from the US and the UK. They're very good at this. Maybe stuff's getting launched from Ukrainian soil. Maybe some Ukrainians play a hand, but they don't have that indigenous capability. So you say the Ukrainians look fairly sophisticated. You're right, but they're sophisticated because they have the US and the UK behind them. Okay. So that's the first. The Russians, on the other hand, have done it completely themselves. They're way ahead of the US. The US doesn't have a hypersonic missile. We don't have one. Now, we're working on it. Okay, a little late. By the way, here's another dirty little secret. The stuff we're sending to Ukraine, and I mentioned HIMARS, F-16s, Bradley fighting vehicles, and a lot else. All that stuff, it's old stuff. It's old stuff. It's from first of all, it's 80s technology. So it's 40-year-old technology, and it's coming out of inventory, meaning we're giving them the used car lot. The money, when they say U.S. is spending $200 billion on weapons for Ukraine, what we really mean is we've shipped them, notionally $200 billion worth of used garbage, and we're spending the $200 billion to crank out new stuff for ourselves. But here's the problem. Why would you want a new Patriot anti-missile battery? Why would you want a new Abrams tank? They've already proved that even if they're brand new off the assembly line, the technology is obsolete. We need to start over and rebuild the U.S. military from the bottom up with new technology. We can do it, but it'll take 5 years. So we're just behind the 8 ball for at least the next 5 years. And you're absolutely right. The Russians are way ahead of us in all those respects.
When I read those on-the-ground reports, it's like fascinating. It's like a whole brand new kind of warfare where the tanks don't dare get near the front lines. They'll get taken out. Individual soldiers are now getting taken out by drones. It's that cost effective. And like all these tactics have completely reversed. They got the ground-based drones. They've got the ones that don't need radio signals. I mean, it's pretty mind-boggling.
You're exactly right. Yeah. Which is one more reason that the Russians are winning. So, now getting back to the other side of the ultimatum, Putin's supposed to agree to an unconditional ceasefire. We talked about how they're winning and why they're winning across the entire front. Not much standing between Russia. I said they could go to the English Channel. They're not going to, but they probably could. But they're at least going to go to the Dnieper River, which kind of runs down the middle of Ukraine. And there's very little to stop them at this point. But so Putin's supposed to agree to an unconditional ceasefire. First of all, that's a fraud because Ukraine will not respect the ceasefire. They'll use the time. If you had it, it's not going to happen, by the way. I should be clear about that. But if it did, Ukraine would use the time, stock up on weapons, rotate the troops, give them some R&R, recruit more, kidnap more 16-year-olds off the street, because that's about what they're doing these days, to continue the fight. So they would not use it in good faith, number one. But number two, show me a winning army in the history of the world that agreed to an unconditional ceasefire. Doesn't happen. The loser will take a ceasefire, or if if you've been beaten, you'll agree to it. German army at the end of World War I, the armistice. That was not a peace treaty. The peace treaties happened from 1919 to 1922. But what happened in 1918, November 11th, 1918, was an armistice, which is roughly the equivalent of a ceasefire. But the people who agreed to it were the losers, which were the Germans. Same thing here. So Ukraine will sign up for that because they want to buy time. But why should the Russians? Why would you ever?
Okay. All right. So we're going to watch. Probably Trump will do some symbolic things. Putin won't respond, and it'll just be back to business as usual.
Well, I wouldn't say symbolic. If you put secondary sanctions on China and India because they're buying Russian oil, and you try to eliminate the Russian ghost fleet of tankers What they do, the Russians will fill a tanker with oil, send it out. They'll turn off their transponders, turn off their GPS, paint the back of the vessel so you don't know where it's from, and it'll meet another vessel at sea, and they'll transship the oil and then send it to China. That's going on. It's going on every day. The other big thing is we're going to cut you out of the insurance market. The Russians are not going to be able to go to Lloyd's of London and get insurance on your